bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome to our podcast. What a great guest we have today. I've waited a long time to get someone of this caliber, and I have Richard M. Ebeling with us today to talk about the moral foundations of the free market. Now, as I introduce you to Dr. Ebeling, you are a distinguished professor of ethics and free enterprise leadership at the Citadel, but that's one of many hats that you have worn over the years. And I'd ask you, set aside your modesty for a moment and help me toot your horn and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and why you're doing what you're doing.
I have been a professor in several places and done other things. For about 15 years, I was the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College. Probably, or I hope some of your listeners know that Hillsdale College is a small private liberal arts college in southern Michigan that takes no federal funds and therefore is independent and free of many of the hamstringing government regulations and controls on higher education. I left Hillsdale because I was offered the opportunity, and I would even say the privilege and honor, of serving as the president for the Foundation for Economic Education. It goes by the initials FEE. I was professor of economics at Northwood University, another private institution that focuses on business education in Midland, Michigan, about 2 hours north of Detroit. But then in the spring of 2014, I was approached and offered this position that I currently hold as the BB&T Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina.
And I got to tell you, one of the things that I look forward to daily is the Future of Freedom Foundation email. And I would encourage our listeners, I'm going to post a link to the Future of Freedom Foundation. They can find it by following this episode at societyandthestate.com/26. But I'll have a link there, and I would encourage them, sign up for the daily email. It's fantastic stuff. Now, specifically, I have you on the podcast today to talk about the moral foundations of a free market. And when it comes to economics, I know a lot of people kind of get this glaze over their eyes and think, oh, that's so hard to understand. Richard, you have a way of introducing your students to the basic moral foundation of individual freedom and choice. And I wondered if you could walk us through how you teach your students that basic morality that's associated with a free market economy.
Well, I teach here at the Citadel in the School of Business. And for instance, when I teach a course on the ethics or the morality of the marketplace, I remind the students at the beginning upon the founding principles upon which the United States was born, specifically those in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I ask the students, do they believe in these principles? And are they understanding what they mean? I will ask the students, are there not many people in the society who challenge this? They scoff at the idea of inalienable or unalienable rights. They look down upon the idea of individual liberty and autonomy and the dignity of the person. And I said that you've probably grown up in high school and other settings, not hearing much about the idea of individual rights. So let me ask you to begin with, how many of you woke up today hoping that during the day someone would come up to you and kill you, and were disappointed when you got home at the end of the day and it hadn't happened? Not many of you. I guess most of you are happy that no one tried to kill you, because most of you prefer to live and would take it as an ethical and immoral affront if someone attempted to. So implicitly, you believe you have a right to your own life. How many of you stepped out the door this morning really looking forward to someone coming up to you and mugging you and robbing you and stealing your purse or your wallet or some other part of your belongings, and again were disappointed when the day ended and it not happening? Well, I doubt very many of you, and you probably consider that it would be ethical and unethical and immoral for anyone to do that. And why? Because that which you have acquired and have earned, you view as properly yours and would be unright for someone to take anything that belongs to you without your consent. Oh, so you mean you have a right to property and would be much abused if anyone took it without your permission. And then finally, did any of you start the day hoping that someone would put a gun to your head, put you in chains, and say that you're now being transported to a slave colony where you will be compelled to live and work and follow the commands of someone who threatens to use force if you disobey them? Please raise your hand if you were really disappointed that no one enslaved you today. And of course, I don't get very many hands. And that says, oh, so you believe that you have a right to your own liberty, to live your life as you choose, guided by your own values, purposes, and goals, with the implicit presumption that since you don't want to be killed, you don't want to be robbed, and you don't want to be enslaved or imprisoned or denied your latitude of free decision, that the only requirement on you is to respect the equivalent rights of others. And I said, so therefore you may have never heard of the idea of unalienable rights or natural rights or personal freedoms, but in fact in your everyday life you desire it, you assume that it will be respected by others, and you would be greatly aggrieved if they were violated. So let's start out with the premise that intuitively within ourselves, our conscience and our reason tells that each person desires and wants these rights to be respected. Now let's then follow through with that. And then I say, well then, how then should people associate? If it would be unethical and immoral to kill a person, steal from a person, or enslave a person for that other person to get what they wanted, how then shall human beings associate? How do you want other human beings to treat you? Would you desire courtesy and politeness and agreement in any associations and arrangements you make with them? Or would you prefer that a person bully you or intimidate you or threaten you in their relationships with you? Well, clearly nobody likes rudeness, discourteousness, force, or infringement. So what we're basically implicitly saying is that each of us would prefer that others deal with us on the basis of mutual consent, voluntary agreement, and a sense of you're not being asked to do anything that you don't view as an improvement in your own circumstances. And then from there, I just proceed to discuss, well, then what is the role of government? What should government do? What is the nature of the market? What are the motives and ethical norms of human behavior that the enterpriser, the businessman, the entrepreneur should follow within these institutional rules of the game that are encapsulated in the principles and ideals of the Declaration of Independence? Is that how society operates today? Is that what government is limited to anymore? Is that what people expect government to do? And what do many attempt to use the government for that would be considered an infringement of this? And what is the rightness or wrongness when businessmen no longer follow by these rules that are encapsulated in the Declaration of Independence, but attempt to use government to gain things from others that others are not willing to give them peacefully and voluntarily? And could we not then say, working out the details of that, that is in fact what we often call crony capitalism or the interventionist welfare state? And that is the sort of the general concepts and stepping stones that I use to set the stage to then proceed with the more detailed and specific and applied notion of these ideas.
Dr. Ebeling, I appreciate you making the distinction between crony capitalism and free market capitalism, which you walk your students right up to the doorstep where they can open the door and begin a discussion of economics. And I think you've painted very clearly for them the opportunity to recognize not every economic system is created equal. Let's talk a little bit about the free market model. And, for instance, how does it encourage excellence and at the same time encourage humility?
Okay. Let me have my starting point here where it perhaps rightly belongs, and that is with the ideas of the famous Scottish moral philosopher and economist Adam Smith. Back in the second half of the 1700s, Adam Smith wrote a famous book called The Wealth of Nations. And he said that the moral system would be a system of what he called natural liberty, that each man would be secure and protected in his life, liberty, and honestly acquired property, and that the role of government would be limited to the protection of those liberties in the form of police, courts of adjudication of disputes and accused criminal acts, and national defense. But Smith, though he wasn't that quite of a strict of an advocate of laissez-faire, basically felt that other than maybe some elementary education, some infrastructure, roads and harbors, really didn't believe that government should do much more than that protection of individual liberties. And I say that if men are to live in a system of natural liberties such as this, how is it that individuals can cooperate for mutual benefit without harm to anyone in principle? And Smith says is that men soon learn that they can have higher standards of living if they specialize and divide their labors among themselves. One becomes the butcher, the other becomes the baker, and a third becomes the candlestick maker. And each makes what they have found that they have a skill, knack, or ability for, and produce what they're best at for the wares and the goods and the services of others, rather than attempting to be self-sufficient producers of everything on their own, when their life and living standards would be not much different than that image of Robinson Crusoe on the deserted island having to fend for everything through his own labor and effort. And I said, but Smith, following this rule of natural liberty, said that if men divide their labor, then they are interdependent. If they are interdependent, that means that they rely upon their fellow man for virtually all the other goods, services, amenities, convenience, and wants that would fulfill and improve their life. But if men cannot fight or steal or use physical force against each other, how then do you get others to give you that which they have that you desire? And that requires each individual in his own self-interest to ask himself in that system of division of labor, how can I apply my talents, abilities, skills, and experience to make a product, provide a service that others will value enough and be willing to pay me for, that they will give me what they have that I want in exchange for what I'm able to supply that they in turn reciprocally desire. This means that each individual in his own self-interest must apply his abilities, his skills, his innovative capacities to manufacturing and marketing those things that will improve the circumstances of his fellow men as the very self-interested means of improving his own circumstances. Therefore, this imagery that capitalism is a system of only what's in it for me, dog eat dog, no concern for others in society, the atomistic individual with no ties to the rest of the society, which is the negative connotations that the left, the collectivists, the statists, the interventionists try to create, is absolutely false. If there's any notion of a socialist system, I use that with an extremely small s here, that is a system in which there's a sense of interdependency and concern with the circumstances of others as part of your own betterment, it is capitalism, because capitalism requires each to focus on the conditions of others as the means of improving their own. And in fact, it is the opposite. All forms of collectivism in which the government, the political agency, those with coercive, legitimized power, who presume and arrogate to themselves the authority, the control to tell all others how to act and to conform to the plans and regulations and controls that they impose under threat of force on all the other members of society to achieve what they, the planners, the regulators, the controllers, think is good for everyone, as opposed to the market, where we take the self-interest of others for granted, and given that we respect and recognize the preferences, the desires, the wants, the tastes, the values of others, how can I adjust my conduct to serve what others want so that I can get from them to serve me? Ours is and I'm all using this in a language that is different from today's, it is a system of altruism. I serve others, but for purpose of self-interest, to serve myself. Communism, collectivism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, It is others being in the most negative connotation of selfish. I'm going to make the rest of society conform to what I want, and if they won't, I'm going to hit them over the head with a gun. That's the difference between capitalism and collectivism, a system of mutual respect and betterment based upon voluntary association, or a system of control, command, and coercion, where some arrogates to themselves to enslave the rest of the society to conform to what they consider good.
I love the example that you use, and I think most people can relate to this. When you go into a store, you don't worry that some tough-looking character is going to accost you if you start to walk out of the store without something and threaten you or intimidate you and say, you're not leaving empty-handed. You're buying that pair of shoes or whatever. That's not how it works under a capitalistic model, under a free market model. We have the absolute option of either saying yes or no.
Correct. And you basically captured the example I often use, and that is to my students. I said, have you ever been to the mall, entered a shoe store, tried on a pair, looked at the styles, looked at the prices, and decided that it doesn't quite fit right, the style is not what you're looking for, the price is not attractive enough to pay, and as you start leaving the store, some big thug, a shoe store bouncer, stands in front of you in the entrance and says to you, the boss says you ain't leaving till you buy a pair of shoes. No, because that isn't allowed. That's against the rules and the norms of the market economy. No one can be coerced into doing that. You can leave the store having purchased nothing. You can walk down the mall hallway and look at another shoe store, or choose not to buy shoes at all and buy something else, or to go home from the mall having bought nothing and just window shopped or just tried to kill time and walk around. That is the very nature of the market economy. And in fact, if anyone attempted to force us to buy their product before leaving their store or business or enterprise, we would all consider ourselves inappropriately abused and taken advantage of and violated. That is the nature of the market economy. The shoemaker, the shoe store seller, like all other products, must instead, how does he approach us in the store? Service with a smile. The customer is always right, even to an annoying fault sometimes. Hovering over you, can I show you something? What are you looking for? Let me know if that's not quite, I'll look in the back. And admittedly, sometimes as customers, we feel as if they're hovering too much on us. But that's merely an exaggeration of the underlying principle that the seller must serve the customer as the means to earning the revenue that enables him to buy what others are offering to sell on the marketplace. Even to a fault that it becomes irritating sometimes in the retail store. But that's just an exaggerated notion of the principle that relationships are based upon consent and agreement, not force and coercion. And that is at the hallmark of the marketplace. Try leaving the United States without a government passport. Try not paying your taxes for services that you sometimes don't want. Try building your house without government code rules and permits. Try hiring someone at a mutually agreeable wage that the government considers below the legalized mandatory minimum wage. Go on and on. The state presumes to tell us how we can interact, how we can associate, what we can buy and sell, where we can even go with or without their permission, as opposed to the market, where nothing must be done without the voluntary consent, agreement, and mutual betterment of all the participants.
You've mentioned a number of different isms that philosophically have been aligned against free market economics and against the individual and against limited government. Collectivism, I think, is probably the best catch-all. But I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, where is the greatest threat or the greatest pushback against the free market society taking place? Is it the college campuses? Is it in the marketplace itself? Where do you see that threat?
Unfortunately, it's pervasively throughout the society. But it is without a doubt that right now, the hotbed of anti-individualism, anti-capitalism, anti-free market are the colleges and university campuses of too many institutions of higher learning throughout the United States. we see this in these thugs, these gangster students who will not allow people who hold views different than their own to even appear on campus and give a talk. They will physically accost people, even causing them harm, to take them to the hospital for treatment. They will smash windows, destroy physical property, with this idea of there shall be no views other than those that fit our collectivist conceptions, our tribalistic notions of race, gender, ethnicity, language unity. I mean, these people, while they call themselves the anti-fascists, the anti-fas, they are a reborn version of the Italian fascists, and especially the Nazi thugs. And it's worth remembering that Nazi is just an acronym. It stood for the National Socialist Workers' Party, the German National Social. These are the National Socialists who pigeonhole people not on the basis of being individuals, but what is your race? What is your gender? What is your ethnicity? What is your religion? And on this basis, they determine who has benefits and privileges and who is to be treated without benefits, without privileges, and expect to bear the costs in various and sundry ways to privilege others through the plunder of either violence or the use of the state. Now, this has carried over into the media with this hysteria about virtually anything and this power of intimidation, particularly with the words racism or Nazism. Now, let's be clear. Racism is a form of the most crude and tribal form of collectivism. It's the presumption that the individual has no identity of his own, other than that is genetically determined by the peculiar racial characteristics of his ancestors, and that this defines you, determines you, and sets your place in society, what benefits, what disadvantages, what privileges, and what costs. And that your relationship to yourself and to others is pigeonholed in this fashion. Or it could be gender. It can be ethnicity. It can be religion. But these are the Nazis who refuse to recognize people as individuals, and rather, on the basis of these group identities, that they will compel people to accept and then be treated by force, in the context of which they're the fascists, they're the brown shirts beating up Jews in Germany in the 1930s because of who an individual is by the accident of who their religious ancestors were, defined by them as some blood relative. This is the perversity of language. The media has picked up on this. They're using it. They define it. And then you have you're getting me on a rant here. I apologize. But
That's
then
okay.
then you get the people who are supposed to oppose this, the conservatives, the Republicans. They're the ones who traditionally talk about limited government, right? The rights of the Declaration of Independence, right? Impartial rule of law. They are such ethical compromisers, political cowards. Are they arguing for individualism? Are they defending property and the right of freedom of speech? Well, yes, but, we can't allow certain kinds of speech. I'll tell you, so far, the one public organization, at least that I'm aware of following the media, that at least has insisted that even the most repugnant person is allowed to speak unmolested, is that organization which most conservatives hate, and that is the American Civil Liberties Union. At least so far, maybe they'll end up changing their tune under their own left-wing pressures. But so far, they've said even the most repugnant speech, even Nazi speech, cannot be suppressed. Whereas the conservatives, they're all waffling because they're afraid of the political fallout, because some news anchor might imply that they're condoning Nazism. This is the dilemma that we're in. That this is a dangerous unhinging of the most important political principles and ideals and premises of the society. This is the way a society goes downhill if it is not stopped in its early stages.
Dr. Ebeling, I have one more question for you, and then we're up against our time constraints. you mentioned that the watchwords of a capitalist free market morality are liberty, honesty, and humility, which I would just point out stand in direct contrast to the attitudes you were just describing of the people who are out there trying to impose through force or through intimidation, a particular point of view on others. People who want to inoculate themselves against weaponized guilt and that guilt by association game are the people who are most clear on where they stand. In other words, who have a solid foundation by which they understand the world. And so I want to ask you, what do you recommend in terms of the resources that people who wish to be well-grounded in understanding the capitalist free market morality, what should they be reading? What kind of sources should they be accessing so they can stand boldly when others are trying to coerce them?
Well, there are a number of organizations whose supplying of material, articles, literature, I would highly recommend. Certainly, as you were yourself saying, the Future of Freedom Foundation, their daily articles and blogs and podcasts, that's fff.org. The Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. They have articles every day available on their website, touching upon underlying principles and applications. There are a number of other more policy organizations that attempt to operate in the stream of Washington politics that do a lot of good. What it used to be known as intellectual ammunition in the lexicon of Ayn Rand, and that is the Cato Institute puts out a lot of good material. The Marcatus Center, affiliated with George Mason University in Virginia. The Heartland Institute in Chicago. I highly recommend them in terms of if you're interested in demonstrations of the fallacies, limits, and abuses of science over climate change. They've done yeoman's work on challenging on scientific grounds the misconceptions on global warming and climate change. There's the Competitive Enterprise Institute. They focus on regulatory issues. And then also wherever you are in the country, there's invariably a state-level free market-oriented think tank that, besides the big pictures of the nationwide and global problems, focus on the policy issues in your state and track those down. Some are more libertarian, some are more conservative, but in general, particularly on both the local and the state and federal economic policy issues, there's plenitude of material to inform yourself and to help you think a bit more clearly on the nature of man, markets, and government.
All right, Dr. Richard M. Ebeling, thank you so much for your time today and for being a clear voice of reason in a time where I think it's really desperately needed.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.